He threw her out in the storm, called her a gold digger, and broke the woman who loved him more than life itself. But 5 years later, when fate made him kneel before her and their son, every word he once said came back to destroy him. What happens when the billionaire who had everything loses the only hearts that ever truly belonged to him? Welcome back to Beyond Color Stories, where love isn't fairy tale perfect, it's painfully real. Tonight's story isn't about luxury or power, it's about regret, second chances, and the kind of love that never dies, no matter how deeply it's buried. So sit back, feel every heartbeat, and let this story remind you that sometimes losing someone teaches you what love truly means. By the way, we'd love to know, where are you listening to me from? Drop your city or country in the comments so we can connect with all our amazing viewers around the world. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that will touch your heart. The night the storm raged over the city, lightning slicing through the dark sky like the heavens themselves were angry, Coldstone's mansion stood like a fortress of arrogance and wealth, its marble floors echoing with tension. Inside, the air was thick with silence, until his voice shattered it. "You're after my money, not me." The words hit Florina harder than the thunder that roared outside. Her heart pounded, fragile yet fierce, while her hands clutched the engagement ring that once symbolized everything pure between them. She couldn't breathe, couldn't understand how the man who once kissed her tears away could now throw daggers of hate through his words. "Coldstone," she whispered, her voice trembling like a candle in wind. "I loved you before I even knew what you owned." Her tone carried a truth so raw it almost softened the fury in his eyes. But pride has a louder voice than love. His jaw tightened, veins pulsing against his temples, his gaze sharp as steel. "Don't lie to me, Florina. My mother warned me. Everyone said you were after my wealth, and I, stupidly, ignored them." The accusation stung deeper than anything he'd ever said. She took a shaky breath, rain from her hair dripping down her cheeks like tears of the storm itself. "I worked in that art cafe when you found me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You didn't see my heart. You saw my smile and you said it made your world feel alive again." Her words hung between them, but his silence cut them apart. He turned his back to her, fists clenched, his reflection flickering in the glass as lightning illuminated his cold expression. "Enough," he muttered, his tone laced with finality. She took a step toward him, desperate, her fingers trembling as she reached out to touch the man who had once called her his entire world. But he stepped away. The distance between them now felt like eternity. "You think love survives on fairy tales?" he hissed. "You think it feeds without trust?" Florina's breath caught. "And what feeds trust, Coldstone? Lies or love?" Her voice was soft, but her question struck deep. For a second, just a second, his eyes flickered with doubt, the faint echo of the man she knew. But pride returned quicker than remorse. "Get out," he said coldly. The words froze the air, her trembling lips parted, disbelief clouding her eyes. "You don't mean that," she whispered, hoping his heart would resist his pride. But instead, he pointed toward the door like she was a stranger trespassing his empire. "Get out of my house. Out of my life." The sound of the storm outside roared in answer, rain hammering against the windows as if the world itself mourned what was dying between them. Florina's tears blurred her vision, but her dignity fought to stay upright. She didn't beg. She didn't scream. She only slipped off the ring he had placed on her finger under 1,000 stars and set it gently on the glass table between them. "You may own the world, Coldstone," she said softly, "but tonight, you lost the only part that ever truly loved you." Her words sliced through the silence like a farewell no storm could wash away. As she turned toward the door, thunder rolled again, echoing her pain. The mansion's grand chandelier flickered, casting shadows that danced across Coldstone's face. shadows that looked far too much like regret. Florina opened the door, and the wind hit her like freedom and heartbreak combined. The rain soaked her dress instantly, her hair clinging to her face as she stepped out into the tempest. Every step felt like a goodbye to the life she had built around him. Lightning cracked behind her, and for a heartbeat she saw his reflection in the glass, standing still, unmoving, haunted. She paused for a single moment, hoping he would call her name, but the silence was louder than the storm. He didn't move. He didn't stop her, and so she walked into the rain, her heart shattering into pieces he would never find again. Inside, Coldstone stood alone, his chest heavy with an ache he refused to name. His reflection in the window stared back at him, a man who had everything yet suddenly had nothing. The sound of the door closing behind her echoed through the mansion like a curse. He walked to the table, his eyes landing on the ring she had left behind. The sight of it twisted something inside him, but he forced himself to look away. "She'll come back," he muttered, convincing himself as his pride wrapped tighter around his broken heart. But outside, the rain carried her footsteps farther and farther away, washing her tears into the night. Florina walked without direction, her heels sinking into puddles, thunder crashing like the sound of her own heart breaking apart. Her breath trembled with every inhale, every flash of lightning revealing the pain etched across her face. She clutched her coat around her, whispering to herself, "Don't look back. Never look back." The city lights blurred through her tears, and the storm felt endless. Each drop of rain hit her skin like a memory she was trying to forget. His voice, his touch, his laughter that once felt like home. She remembered the way he used to hold her under that very same sky, promising forever, whispering that her heart was safe with him. Now, that promise was ashes scattered by thunder. Her knees weakened, but her spirit didn't. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet strength began to burn, a vow that she would rise again, that she would never allow his doubt to define her worth. A black car passed by, splashing water near her feet, but she didn't flinch. She walked into the unknown, drenched but unbroken. Behind her, Coldstone finally moved toward the window, his reflection ghostly against the rain-soaked glass. For a moment he thought he saw her shadow still walking down the driveway, her silhouette flickering in the lightning. He whispered her name, Florina. But only the rain answered. His voice trembled, the weight of what he had done beginning to pierce through the armor of his pride. He poured himself a drink, but it tasted like guilt. He sat in silence, haunted by her last words, the thunder outside sinking with the pounding in his chest. For the first time in years, the mansion felt too large, too empty, too cold. His mind replayed her voice. "I loved you before I even knew what you owned." The sentence burned through him, echoing in every corner of the room until it became unbearable. He hurled the glass across the floor, shattering it into pieces that mirrored his own reflection. The sound faded, but the ache didn't. Outside, Florina finally reached the end of the long driveway, rain dripping from her eyelashes as she looked back one last time. Through the curtain of storm, she could still see the mansion, his world of gold and emptiness. For a second, she thought she saw him standing at the window, a dark silhouette frozen in regret, but she turned away before her heart could soften. The road ahead was long, the night endless, but her tears slowly mixed with the rain until pain and freedom felt the same. She whispered to herself, "One day, he'll remember this storm," and with that, she disappeared into the darkness, her figure swallowed by rain, leaving behind a love story that would one day return to haunt him. Inside, Coldstone stood unmoving, his breath shallow, his pride cracking with every drop that hit the glass. He didn't know it yet, but that night, the night he threw her away, was the beginning of his own destruction. 2. The storm had passed. but its memory lingered in Coldstone's mansion like an unwelcome ghost. The morning sun filtered through tall windows, lighting the shards of glass still scattered on the floor from the night he shattered his own reflection. He hadn't slept. The whiskey burned through his veins, yet the real fire was the echo of Florina's voice, looping endlessly in his mind. You may own the world, but tonight you lost the only part that ever truly loved you. Her words had become the walls around him. Days turned into months, months into years, but time refused to erase her. He built more, achieved more, and wore his success like armor, but the hollowness beneath it only deepened. Every award, every deal, every handshake was a reminder that he had traded love for pride. He stood at the window of his penthouse, overlooking the city that worshipped him, but even the skyline seemed meaningless now. He had everything, yet the silence that followed him into every room was deafening. His mansion had grown larger, but it felt emptier. There were nights when he would wake up drenched in sweat, convinced he heard her laugh somewhere in the house, only to realize it was the echo of his memory playing tricks on him again. His staff whispered about how the once ruthless billionaire had become quieter, more distant, his temper replaced with a cold, eerie calm. In boardrooms he was untouchable, commanding respect with his precision and control, but behind closed doors his heart was a battlefield he could never win. He had tried to bury the past under wealth, but guilt has a way of rising through the cracks, whispering reminders when the world grows quiet. Sometimes in the middle of a meeting, he'd see a glimpse of a woman in a passing car, and his chest would tighten, only to realize it wasn't her. Florina's ghost followed him everywhere, not as punishment from her, but from his own conscience. 5 years later, Coldstone's name had become legend. Magazines called him the Titan of Steel and Storm, a man who conquered industries and never looked back. But every victory was built on regret. Each flash of the camera made him look powerful, but the moment the lights faded, so did his composure. At night he'd sit in his vast study, surrounded by blueprints and silence, staring at the ring he once placed on Florina's finger. He had kept it, hidden away in a drawer he couldn't stop opening. He'd run his fingers over the metal, wondering where she was, what kind of life she had built after he destroyed hers. And yet, even in all his remorse, he never dared to find her. Perhaps it was guilt, or perhaps fear of what he would see in her eyes if he did. Meanwhile, miles away in a small coastal city, life bloomed quietly for Florina. Gone was the fragile girl who walked out into the storm. In her place stood a woman who had learned how to turn pain into power. The rain that once drenched her sorrow had become her symbol. She had built her own world from the ruins he left behind. Her fashion brand, Lina Atelier, had grown from sketches in a tiny apartment to a name whispered in elite circles for its strength and elegance. Florina's hands, once trembling from heartbreak, now crafted beauty from silk and dreams. Yet behind every triumph was a secret she guarded fiercely. Her son, Max. Max was 5 now, bright-eyed and curious, his laughter like sunlight after years of darkness. Every time Florina looked into his grey eyes, eyes identical to Coldstone's, she felt the sting of bittersweet love. He was her greatest gift and her constant reminder. When he asked about his father, she smiled softly and said, "He's somewhere in the world learning what truly matters." But deep inside, she feared the day fate would bring their paths close again. One evening, as Florina stitched the final bead on a silver gown that shimmered like moonlight, her best friend and assistant, Lina, entered with a grin. "You're the highlight of tomorrow's charity gala. Even the city's billionaires are attending. Word is, Coldstone's one of them." The needle froze between Florina's fingers. Her heart skipped a beat she quickly disguised with composure. "He won't remember me," she said quietly, forcing a smile, but her voice betrayed her calm. "You sure about that?" Lena teased gently, sensing the storm behind Florina's eyes. Florina walked to the window, gazing at the skyline painted in twilight hues. Her reflection stared back, a woman who had everything to lose if the past returned. "If fate wants us to meet," she murmured, "then fate will decide how much I've healed." She turned back to her gown, her movement steady, but her pulse raced. Somewhere deep within, fear and strength tangled like old lovers. That night, while Florina watched Max sleep peacefully, his tiny fingers curled around his stuffed bear, Coldstone sat alone in his penthouse, flipping through tomorrow's guest list for the gala he was sponsoring. His pen hovered over a name he didn't expect to see: Florina Hale, lead designer, Lena Atelier. His heart stopped. The ink bled on the paper where his hand trembled. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair, disbelief clouding his mind. "It can't be her," he muttered, but every fiber of his being knew it was. Memories crashed through him, her laugh, her scent, the rain that swallowed her last goodbye. He closed his eyes, exhaling a breath that felt like it had been held for 5 years. For the first time since she left, the world didn't feel big enough to hide his regret. Florina sat by Max's bedside, brushing a stray curl from his forehead, whispering, "You're my whole world, Max. No one will take that from us." But fate, with its cruel sense of irony, was already at work. The same world that once broke her was spinning her back into the orbit of the man who started it all. As midnight approached, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, soft, but enough to make Florina's heart tremble. She stood by the window, watching raindrops slide down the glass, memories rising uninvited. She remembered that night, his voice, his coldness, the ring glinting on the table. She had rebuilt herself from ashes, but ashes still remember fire. And tomorrow, she would face it. Across the city, Coldstone sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the ring again, the one she left behind. His fingers curled around it like it was his last link to forgiveness. He whispered into the darkness, "If she's there tomorrow, I'll make it right." But deep down, he knew apologies weren't currency enough to buy back the trust he had destroyed. He looked at his reflection in the mirror and saw a stranger wearing his guilt like a crown. The man who once thought love was weakness now realized it was the only thing that had ever made him strong. As dawn crept across the horizon, two hearts, one hardened by regret, the other guarded by strength, prepared to collide once more. The city began to wake, oblivious to the storm fate was about to resurrect. Florina pressed the final seam of her gown, its silver threads catching the first light of morning. "It's just another event," she whispered to herself, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her lie. Coldstone adjusted his tie in the mirror, but the reflection staring back didn't feel powerful. It looked haunted. He glanced at the file on his desk again, her name highlighted like a wound that refused to close. His chest tightened. He wasn't ready, but perhaps he never would be. As his chauffeur announced, "Your car is ready, sir," he gave one last look at the ring before slipping it into his pocket. Florina lifted her son into her arms, kissing his forehead. "Be good for Aunt Lena, okay? Mommy has work." Max giggled. "I'll draw you something beautiful." His innocence filled the room with warmth she desperately needed. As she left her home, the morning sky shifted from gold to grey, the first whisper of rain brushing against her skin, a cruel reminder that some storms never truly end. And miles away, Coldstone stepped into his car, the city lights reflecting off the tinted glass as he whispered under his breath, "If I see her again, please let it not be too late." Neither knew that within 24 hours the universe would weave them into the same golden-lit ballroom where destiny itself would hold its breath. The rain began to fall again, slow, steady, familiar, and in that moment, somewhere deep inside both their hearts, something stirred, an unspoken knowing that fate had unfinished business. The night arrived with a velvet sky painted in deep indigo, and the city glittered like 1,000 scattered diamonds beneath the weight of expectation. Inside the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers reflected the light in golden rivers, casting intricate patterns across polished marble floors, their shimmer dancing across gowns and tuxedos alike. The air smelled faintly of roses and expensive perfume, mingling with the soft strains of a string quartet that floated like whispers between the guests. Coldstone entered, impeccably dressed, his black suit tailored to perfection, the crisp white of his shirt and the polished shoes completing the illusion of control he had maintained for so many years. He moved through the crowd with effortless charm, nodding at board members, philanthropists and socialites. But behind the practiced smile, his eyes were dull, haunted, scanning every corner of the room, searching for something he dared not name aloud. And then she appeared. Florina stepped into the ballroom, her presence so commanding that the music seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Every light, every reflective surface seemed drawn to her. The silver gown she wore clung to her in a way that suggested both strength and defiance, shimmering like liquid moonlight, every step she took whispering of the woman she had become, untouchable, radiant, and untethered by the past. Her hair fell in perfect waves, catching the glimmer of chandeliers, framing her face where the faintest smile touched her lips, one she reserved for herself alone. Coldstone, immersed in the dull hum of conversations and camera flashes, froze mid-step. His attention, which had skimmed over countless faces throughout the evening, snapped to her like lightning striking a lonely tower. Time stopped. His chest tightened as if the world itself had constricted around him, squeezing every ounce of air from his lungs. Florina, alive, beautiful, untouchable, stood before him, and for the first time in 5 years, Coldstone realized what he had lost. His breath caught uneven and jagged, the room around him blurring as the orchestra's music became nothing but a faint echo behind the thunder of his heart. He thought he was dreaming, that the silver light bathing her form was a trick of imagination, conjured from memories he had buried in the depths of his arrogance. She looked at him. Not with surprise, not with recognition, not with warmth, but with cold clarity that pierced deeper than any words could. Her eyes, calm and shimmering with unspoken defiance, met his, and he felt the weight of every mistake he had made, every cruel word, every night he had spent alone, chasing shadows while ignoring the reality that had walked away from him. It was a gaze that stripped him bare, a gaze that told him in silence what no apology could ever repair. She no longer belonged to him, and perhaps she never had. Then she turned. Florina walked past him, each movement a statement, each sway of her gown a declaration of independence. Her back was straight, her head held high, and with every step, Coldstone felt the distance between them grow, not measured in feet, but in years of choices he could never undo. She passed through the crowd like a comet blazing through a night sky, leaving behind awe, envy, and unspoken questions, while he remained rooted to the spot, his mind struggling to comprehend the collision of his past and present. He pushed forward. Through clusters of guests, through conversations that seemed to fade into nothingness, Coldstone navigated like a man possessed. His hand brushed against strangers, and he barely noticed. His eyes locked on her as she moved gracefully toward the backstage area. Each second stretched into eternity. He wanted to speak, to call her name, to say something, anything that would reach across the chasm of 5 years. But before he could, she vanished. The curtains swallowed her, and with them, the possibility of explanation, of closure, of redemption. The ballroom lights reflected off the golden panels, but none of it mattered anymore. He was alone in the midst of opulence, every familiar face around him now a blur. The music continued, but it was meaningless, hollow, like the shell of a life he thought he had mastered. He clutched his glass, the liquid inside untouched, and the weight of her absence pressed down harder than any physical force could. 5 years of pride, arrogance, and false control had led him to this singular, excruciating moment, watching the woman he loved, yet could not reach, disappear again. Memories assaulted him, her laughter echoing through rain-soaked streets, her trembling hands holding his as she whispered promises he never kept, the warmth of her presence beside him in simpler, softer times. He remembered throwing her out into the storm, the lightning illuminating her retreating figure, the rain soaking her, and the shattering of his own soul at the moment he chose ego over love. Each memory crashed against him, relentless, unforgiving, refusing to be ignored. He staggered back, gripping the railing of the grand staircase. His heart raced uncontrollably, yet the coldness inside him seemed to grow in proportion to his panic. The ballroom, so full of life, laughter, and grandeur, had become a prison of reflection. Coldstone realized then that wealth, status, and power meant nothing if they could not bring back what he had lost. The realization struck like a dagger. Florina had built a world without him, and he was not invited. Outside, the evening air pressed against the windows, but the doors remained closed. The thought that she might leave the city, leave this life, leave him in perpetual regret, made him clench his fists, his knuckles whitening. Each second she remained out of reach was a second he had no right to reclaim, yet a second he could not endure losing. He imagined following her, confronting her, begging for a second chance. But pride and fear locked his tongue. And then, just as he considered turning back to the empty halls, a faint sound reached him. The soft echo of laughter, not hers, but a reminder of the life she was living. It was a cruel confirmation that she had moved on, that Max, the child whose existence he had never acknowledged, was thriving under her care. The image burned in his mind, her strength, her independence, her love reserved for another life, for someone who was not him. Coldstone's breath caught. Every instinct screamed at him to act, to speak, to bridge the impossible gap, yet the moment passed before he could. She had stepped through the heavy velvet curtains into a backstage corridor, her silhouette swallowed by shadow and distance. He was left with the glittering ballroom, the harsh lights, and the crushing weight of what he had lost. The realization came like a flood. Florina no longer needed him. She had rebuilt herself into someone untouchable, someone radiant, someone who could survive storms alone. And the only thing left for him to face was the ruin of his own making, the lifetime of regret, the weight of pride, and the emptiness that money could never fill. His hand hovered over the crystal glass once more, trembling slightly. He wanted to scream, to call her back, but no words would reach her now. He had one choice: to confront the wreckage within himself before it consumed what little remained of his soul. The strings of the orchestra played on, and the guests continued their celebrations, unaware of the emotional tempest that had struck the man in their midst. Coldstone took a deep breath, his chest tight as he whispered under his breath, "She's stronger than I imagined, and I am nothing without her." For the first time in 5 years, the billionaire realized the power of what he had lost. The room shimmered around him, gold and crystal sparkling like distant stars. Yet all he could see was her figure fading into the backstage shadows, untouchable, untamed, and unforgettable. The night stretched endlessly, the music fading into the background of his racing thoughts. He had glimpsed a world where she thrived without him, and the reality hit harder than any storm ever could. The woman he had thrown away was alive, victorious, and utterly beyond his reach. And in that fleeting, suspended moment, Coldstone understood the true price of pride, and it burned hotter than any fortune he had ever amassed. Coldstone's chest heaved as he pushed through the last cluster of gala guests, the glittering lights around him blurring into streaks of gold and crystal. His mind, consumed with the memory of Florina's cold, unwavering gaze, urged him forward like a man running through fog, desperate to catch what he had lost, desperate to speak, desperate to make the past bend to the present. He reached the edge of the ballroom, the exit doors swinging gently in the evening air, and there she was, just a few steps ahead, her silver gown glimmering under the outdoor lights, every movement precise, every gesture a careful balance of grace and dignity. But before he could call her name, before he could take that step that might bridge the years of silence and pain, another presence appeared, quiet, calm, commanding not by wealth, but by an ease that spoke of care and familiarity. The man's hand rested gently on Florina's back, guiding her with the soft authority of someone who belonged in her world, who had earned trust through deeds and tenderness rather than power. "Max is waiting," he said softly, his voice low and comforting, the words slipping into the night like a whisper meant only for her. Coldstone froze mid-step, the words hitting him with the force of a lightning strike. Max! The name exploded inside his chest, tearing through the walls of denial he had so meticulously built over 5 years. He blinked, staring as Florina's face tilted slightly, a faint, polite smile brushing her lips as she nodded toward the man. That smile, so controlled, so delicate, was a dagger and a revelation all at once. Coldstone's gaze followed them to the sleek black car waiting under the faint glow of streetlights. And then he saw him, the child, tiny, laughing with pure joy, the sort of laughter that could melt the hardest of hearts, the sort of laughter that should never have belonged to him yet did. His grey eyes met Coldstone's for a fleeting second, and the world spun violently, a blur of recognition and horror. Every memory, every choice, every cruel decision came crashing down. That boy was his son. The realization struck harder than any storm, harder than any financial loss, harder than the nights he had spent alone with his remorse. Years of arrogance, years of dismissal, years of pride, collapsed in a heartbeat as the truth became unbearable, undeniable, and immediate. Coldstone's hands trembled, and he pressed them against his chest, as if trying to physically contain the tidal wave of guilt that surged through him. He had thrown away the woman who had loved him unconditionally. He had discarded the child whose existence was proof of that love. And now, standing just a few feet away, he was confronted with the magnitude of his mistakes, with the reality that life had moved forward without him, that love had endured, and that he had no place in it. The black car's engine hummed softly, a lullaby to the new life he could never claim, and as Florina opened the door and lifted the boy into her arms, the sight tore at him. The boy's tiny fingers clutched a stuffed toy, a perfect mirror of innocence and joy, unaware of the storm raging in the man observing him. Florina's hand lingered on the boy's back as she leaned down, smoothing his hair, whispering words that made Coldstone's heart constrict in ways he hadn't known possible. The intimacy between them, the ease, the care, the absolute naturalness of it, was a world he could never enter. She smiled at the doctor with a faint gratitude that he could not offer, a look that spoke volumes without uttering a sound, a look that reminded Coldstone of every moment he had squandered. He stumbled back slightly, struggling to breathe, the cold night air feeling suffocating against the guilt pressing his ribs. He had been obsessed with wealth, status, and control, yet here was proof that none of it mattered without love, without connection, without the human warmth he had once taken for granted. The car began to pull away, sleek black metal reflecting streetlights, and Coldstone watched helplessly as the distance between them increased, each meter a dagger in his chest. He whispered into the empty night, his voice trembling and raw, "God, what have I done?" But unlike the storm that had raged years before, there was no rain, no thunder, no dramatic heavens splitting open. Only the storm that now consumed him from within, invisible yet unbearable. The crowd inside the gala continued, laughter and champagne glasses echoing faintly, oblivious to the quiet devastation unfolding outside. Coldstone remained frozen, his eyes fixed on the departing car, on the back of the woman who had taught him what love was, and on the child whose innocence he had abandoned. The wind tugged at his coat, but it was powerless against the whirlwind of regret consuming him. He took a hesitant step forward, then stopped, realizing that no step, no word, no gesture could rewind time, could undo the past, could erase the pain he had caused. The child in the car looked back once, playful, unknowing, unaware of the identity of the man whose gaze followed him, unaware that every heartbeat of the man outside was a plea for forgiveness that could never fully be granted. Coldstone's throat burned, dry and tight. Memories of Florina flooded in uncontrollably. The nights they had laughed together, the quiet evenings spent wrapped in one another's arms, the words they had shared before pride, before fear, before everything shattered. He remembered the rain, her trembling fingers, the last look she had given him before walking out into the storm, and he crumpled inwardly at the thought that she had borne all of this alone, had raised his son without him, had built a life untouched by his presence. The black car disappeared around the corner, leaving him standing alone under a street lamp, the soft hum of the city beneath him a cruel contrast to the roaring chaos in his heart. He pressed a hand to his face, trying to stop the trembling, but it was futile. The magnitude of his loss, the immediacy of his failure, and the living proof of love that had survived without him were too much to bear. He whispered again, this time louder, as though the night itself could hear his confession, "Florina, Max." And yet, as he stood there, frozen, the faintest sound of laughter, the distant lights of the city, and the empty road stretching before him served as a haunting reminder. He was powerless now. He had once been a king in a world of wealth and influence, but here, in the most important realm, he was nothing, a man left to reckon with the consequences of his own arrogance. Coldstone's hands shook uncontrollably as he imagined reaching out, catching them before they disappeared into the night, yet he knew instinctively it was impossible. He was a stranger to the life he had abandoned, a phantom in the happiness he could no longer claim. The memory of her eyes, calm, controlled, untouchable, seared into him like fire, a permanent reminder of the price of pride, the cost of mistrust, and the depth of the love he had thrown away. He fell back against the wall, closing his eyes, letting the city's cool air wash over him as if it could soothe the inferno inside. But it could not. Nothing could. He was alone with his guilt, alone with the truth he had long denied, alone with the undeniable fact that the child he had never known, the woman he had betrayed, and the life he could have shared were slipping further and further from his grasp. The night seemed endless, the darkness heavy, pressing down like judgment from above. Yet Coldstone remained, rooted in anguish, a man reduced to the rawest, most vulnerable form of himself. He whispered again, almost to himself, almost to the empty street, "What have I done?" The words echoed, unanswered, as the car disappeared entirely, leaving only the silent witness of a heart that knew it had failed in the most irreversible way. And for the first time in years, he felt the fragile, unbearable weight of true loss. A lesson carved deep into the marrow of his soul, one that he could neither escape nor undo. 5. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Florina's studio, casting sharp, angular beams across the polished hardwood floors, illuminating every meticulous detail of her work, the sketches pinned to the walls, fabrics draped across mannequins, beads scattered like tiny jewels, a universe she had built from scratch, from heartache, from determination. It was her sanctuary, the fortress of her independence, the one place where she could touch her dreams without feeling the weight of the past pressing against her chest. And yet, that fragile peace shattered the instant the door opened, as if the world itself conspired to remind her that the past was never gone. Coldstone stood there, framed in the doorway, an unexpected storm in the quiet morning light. He looked nothing like the arrogant man who had thrown her out 5 years ago. The suit he wore was immaculate, tailored with the precision she had once admired, but it couldn't mask the ruin in his eyes, the exhaustion etched into every line of his face, the raw vulnerability that clung to him like a second skin. There was no pride now, no composure, no untouchable air of superiority, only the weight of a man who had finally understood the cost of his own choices. For a long moment, neither spoke. The room was filled with the scent of fabric, the faint hum of the city outside, and the almost tangible tension that hung like a curtain between them. Max's laughter from the next room, a fleeting memory of what Coldstone had lost, echoed faintly, and it was enough to send a jolt through the billionaire's chest. "Please, I need to talk to you," he said finally, voice trembling, breaking the silence like glass shattering on marble. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of years. 5 long, wasted years, 5 years of pain, regret, and realization. Florina's eyes, once filled with trust, warmth, and affection, now held only restraint, an icy shield forged from survival and hard-won independence. She didn't move, didn't flinch, yet the faintest tightening of her lips betrayed the storm within. "Talk?" she asked, her voice steady but low, controlled, like a violin string stretched taut. "You already said everything 5 years ago." The words were calm, yet their precision struck him, harder than any scream, any accusation. They were the quiet echo of finality, a reminder that apologies alone could never rebuild what had been destroyed. Coldstone stepped forward, his movements hesitant, almost reverent, as if approaching a sacred truth. I was wrong, Florina," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, cracking with emotion. "I believed lies. I believed my own fear. I let pride blind me, and I let you walk away." His eyes, a storm of grey, met hers for the briefest instant, and in them she saw the truth he had carried alone for years. The magnitude of his realization was laid bare in his trembling hands, the tightness of his chest, the way he seemed to shrink beneath the enormity of the moment. Tears, long held back by arrogance and stoicism, finally broke free, streaking down his face, marking him as a man stripped bare, humbled, exposed. He fell to his knees in the middle of the studio, the mighty Coldstone brought low, a fallen king at the feet of the woman he had betrayed. The sound of his body hitting the polished floor echoed through the room, a soft, shattering percussion of penance. "You called me a gold digger while I carried your child," Florina said quietly, her voice low, steady, and yet sharp enough to cut through his shame. She didn't shout, didn't tremble. She merely stated the truth, the fact he could no longer deny. Coldstone's face crumbled as the weight of his actions, of his arrogance, and of the years he had wasted became tangible, pressing against him like the coldest of winters. He closed his eyes, letting the guilt consume him. "Forgive me," he whispered, so softly that it could have been the wind brushing across the studio floor. But Florina didn't move. She didn't reach out. Her body was still, her posture unyielding, a monument to the resilience she had forged alone. "I forgave you long ago," she said, voice steady, precise, as if each word were measured, calibrated to pierce without shattering. "But I'll never forget what it cost me." Each syllable was a hammer blow, and yet, even as it struck him, Coldstone understood its truth. There were debts of the heart no apology could repay. For the first time in years, Coldstone experienced the raw, naked truth of humility. He had held the world in his hands, yet it had been meaningless compared to what he had thrown away. His hands rested on the floor, trembling as he realized that the power he had once wielded like a sword could not reach her, could not reclaim what was lost. She was a world of her own making now, untouchable by the wealth, status, or regret he possessed. Florina turned, stepping past him, the hem of her gown brushing lightly against the floor. She moved with purpose, each step measured, each motion deliberate, a quiet declaration that she had survived, that she had built a life where he no longer held dominion. Coldstone's gaze followed her, unrelenting, yet powerless. Every step she took away from him was a reminder of the fortress he had breached with his own arrogance, a fortress that no wealth could rebuild. He reached out once, then stopped, his fingers hovering in the air as if they could grasp time itself. But the moment had passed. She had walked away, leaving him kneeling in the ruins of his pride, alone with nothing but the echo of what he had lost and the unbearable weight of knowing he had been the architect of his own downfall. The studio, so full of life, now seemed cavernous and cold. Every sound, Max's distant laughter, the hum of the sewing machines, the soft whisper of the curtains in the morning breeze, was a reminder that life had moved on without him, that the woman he loved and the child who carried his legacy thrived in a world he could no longer touch. Coldstone remained kneeling, silent, staring at the floor, his mind spinning with the impossible reality that the life he had abandoned had continued without him. The weight of guilt was suffocating, the regret tangible, pressing into his chest like a physical force he could neither resist nor escape. He had lost the woman who had once been everything to him. He had lost the son he had never known, and he had only himself to blame. The morning sun continued to filter through the windows, illuminating every detail, yet for Coldstone it was irrelevant. The world was grey, colourless, stripped of joy. He whispered again, almost to himself, almost in prayer, "What have I done?" The words were both a question and a confession, a plea for redemption that might never come. And in that quiet, stretching moment, he realized that forgiveness alone could not heal the chasm between them. He had to earn it, to prove it, and yet the path forward was unclear, dangerous, and fraught with the knowledge that one wrong move could drive her away forever. Coldstone's eyes rose slowly, meeting the empty space where she had stood. He saw the imprint of her presence on the polished floors, the faint shimmer of the silver gown in the sunlight, and it felt like a cruel reminder that he had failed the only person he had ever truly loved. The studio was still, yet alive with echoes, of the child, of the woman, of the life that had moved forward without him. And Coldstone understood fully and painfully that the fall of a billionaire could never be measured in loss of money or status. It was measured in lost love, in fractured trust, in the moments that could never be reclaimed. He remained on his knees long after she walked away, the silence thick around him, his mind racing, his heart breaking. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the private catastrophe that had just unfolded. Inside, a man who once had the world at his feet understood that the most valuable things cannot be bought, cannot be earned, and cannot be reclaimed without humility, patience, and courage he had never known he possessed. And as he sat there, broken, humbled, and desperate, Coldstone realized that his journey had only just begun. The climb out of shame, toward redemption, toward the love he had lost, toward the son he had never known. The days after that fateful morning blurred into a haze for Coldstone. He moved through the world like a ghost, haunted not by deals or boardrooms, but by the memory of Florina's eyes, the steel behind her restraint, and the child he had never known he would have. Every morning he woke with a familiar ache in his chest, a relentless, gnawing pain that no wealth could ever soothe. He had been a titan in a world of power, but here, in the quiet of his own remorse, he felt smaller than he had ever imagined. The offices, the penthouses, the accolades, none of it mattered. What mattered was the child, the boy who carried a piece of him, a boy whose laughter he had missed, whose tiny hand he had never held until now. Coldstone had watched from a distance, careful to remain unseen, to study from afar without intruding. The first time he saw them, Florina and Max, he nearly faltered in his resolve. She was radiant in the morning sunlight, her eyes soft as she guided Max along the park path. Max's little feet bounced in perfect rhythm with his mother's stride, his laughter light and melodic, echoing through the crisp air. Coldstone's chest tightened, the sound cutting through him like a sharpened blade. How had he let this slip through his fingers? How had he abandoned the most precious parts of his life without a second thought? He saw the boy's grey eyes, mirrors of his own, and felt a pull so deep, so primal, it shook him to his core. Every time Max looked toward him, innocent and unknowing, Coldstone's heart threatened to break. He longed to reach out, to call to them, but fear held him back. Fear of rejection, fear of shattering the fragile peace Florina had built, fear of the anger that might still reside in her heart. And yet he could not stop himself from coming closer each day, his presence a silent shadow at the edges of their lives. That afternoon, Max ran ahead toward the small fountain in the park, chasing the glimmering sunlight on the water. Florina's hand hovered over his shoulder, her protective instincts evident even as she laughed softly at his exuberance. Coldstone's eyes followed every motion, memorizing every detail. The tilt of her head, the curve of her smile, the way she carried herself with elegance even in casual moments. And then, the unthinkable happened. Max, curious and bold, turned abruptly, his eyes searching until they landed on Coldstone. "Mommy," Max said, tugging gently at Florina's sleeve, his voice curious and innocent. "Who's that man who keeps looking at us from the car?" Florina froze, her heart suddenly clenching. She turned slightly, catching the faint reflection of grey eyes, unmistakable, haunting. Her chest tightened. She had feared this moment, had dreaded the collision of past and present, yet here it was, unavoidable. She knew it was him, the man who had once owned her heart, the man who had left it in ruins, the man who was now standing silently, stripped of pride, trembling with the weight of recognition. Coldstone felt his knees weaken at the words. He had been watching every day, unable to step forward, afraid to disrupt their routine, yet incapable of retreating entirely. And now, through the eyes of his son, the invisible tether connecting him to the life he had abandoned was made visible, tangible, undeniable. Max's little fingers gripped Florina's hand, clutching it with a strength that belied his size, anchoring both him and her to reality. Florina approached Coldstone cautiously, her heart a storm of conflicting emotions. The child's perception had forced the encounter, had demanded that the past confront the present. She held Max close, her protective instincts sharp as knives, ready to shield him from the man who had caused so much pain, yet unable to deny the truth reflected in Coldstone's eyes, the raw, unguarded grief of a man who realized too late what he had lost. Coldstone's breath caught in his throat when Max stepped forward, his tiny hands reaching out to the man he did not yet know but somehow recognized. "Daddy," the boy asked softly, tilting his head, sensing the truth adults had tried to hide. The word was innocent, untainted by betrayal or anger, yet it pierced Coldstone's heart like a lance. His hands trembled violently as he knelt before the child, unsure how to bridge the chasm of years that separated them. Every line of his face betrayed vulnerability. Every quiver in his voice revealed the depth of the remorse he had carried for so long. I'm sorry I wasn't there," Coldstone whispered, voice breaking under the weight of 5 years' absence. He reached out cautiously, allowing Max's small fingers to touch his face, to connect in a way that was untainted by adult complexities. The boy giggled lightly, a sound so pure it seemed to cleanse the bitterness from Coldstone's soul, if only for a moment. It was a small miracle, an unspoken acceptance, a bridge formed through innocence and love. Florina watched, silent, her eyes brimming with tears she refused to let fall. She saw the walls around Coldstone crumble, the CEO stripped bare, not by business rivals, not by financial loss, but by the truth of his own failure, by the stark realization of what he had abandoned. He was no longer a titan. He was a man, fragile, trembling, desperate to make amends in the only way left to him, by embracing the living proof of their shared past. Max wrapped his little arms around Coldstone's neck, hugging him tightly, his laughter mingling with the gentle sobs of the man who had failed him. It was an embrace that transcended years, an embrace that forgave without words, that healed in innocence, that demanded no explanation. Coldstone's tears fell freely, each one a testament to the pain of absence, the ache of lost time, and the flickering hope that redemption might still be possible. Florina stepped back, whispering to herself, almost as a mantra, "Don't mistake forgiveness for a second chance." Her words were soft but unwavering, a line drawn clearly in the sands of time, a reminder that trust was earned, not granted, and that the path to redemption would be long, treacherous, and uncertain. She turned and walked away, leaving Coldstone on his knees, holding the child he had missed, enveloped in the only proof that love could still exist despite betrayal and loss. For the first time in years, Coldstone felt the weight of hope mingling with guilt. Max's innocent eyes, his tiny hands, his laughter, it was all a lifeline, a fragile chance to rebuild what had been destroyed. Yet he knew, with the clarity of a man finally stripped of pride, that the road ahead would demand patience, courage, and the willingness to confront the pain he had caused. The child's laughter echoed, fading slowly as Florina led Max away, leaving Coldstone kneeling on the pavement, bathed in sunlight, trembling and yet alive with a possibility he had never dared to imagine. He whispered their names into the air, a vow, a prayer, a plea. "Max, Florina, I will find a way back." And in that quiet, stretching moment, the world seemed to pause. The child's innocent eyes, the woman's guarded strength, the man's shattered pride, all suspended in time, a delicate tableau of love, loss, and the first fragile threads of reconciliation. The stage was set for the next chapter of their lives, a chapter that would test every ounce of patience, every measure of courage, and every beating heart. 7. Coldstone's world had shifted in the quiet moments after that day in the park. Kneeling before Max, feeling the warmth of his son's embrace, hearing the child's innocent laughter fill the empty spaces of his once hollow heart. It was a rhythm he had never known, a heartbeat of hope intertwined with guilt, a fragile chance to repair what he had destroyed. Every day since then, he had taken tentative steps, careful not to frighten Florina, careful not to overstep boundaries she had set. He visited quietly, arriving before the sun peeked over the horizon, leaving after Max had laughed and played, leaving only a faint trace of himself behind, a shadow woven into their routine, a presence they couldn't yet define. The first time Max ran into his arms unprompted, Coldstone had felt a joy so profound it bordered on agony. He remembered how the boy's tiny fingers had curled around his, how trust had been given freely, untainted by past mistakes, and how he had whispered promises into a space that felt sacred, promises that might be fulfilled if only he could prove himself worthy. And yet, each day, as he returned to his skyscraper, the walls of his office, the hollow laughter of colleagues congratulating him on deals that now seemed meaningless, he felt the fragile threads of hope stretch, tremble, and threaten to snap. He feared that fate, ever cruel and unpredictable, could intervene at any moment, snatching away the chance he had been given. Then, one storm-laden evening, fate struck with the force of a hurricane, unrelenting and merciless. Florina had been driving home from her studio, her mind preoccupied with sketches, fittings, and the quiet contemplation of the life she had built for herself and Max. Rain pelted the windshield in sheets, visibility reduced to shadows and fleeting lights, yet she drove on, determined to keep her routines uninterrupted. Max sat beside her, restless but safe, unaware of the danger creeping toward them like a predator waiting in the dark. Coldstone's phone buzzed in the middle of a meeting. A number flashed that he instantly recognized. The hospital, a name he dreaded, a voice that could shatter his chest in an instant. The device slipped from his fingers, falling to the floor with a metallic clang that echoed like a gunshot through the quiet of the room. Time seemed to stop, every second stretching endlessly, as the words from the nurse on the line pierced through his mind. "Mr. Coldstone, there's been an accident. Your wife, your son, Florina." His world imploded. The skyscrapers he had built, the accolades, the fame, the fortune, it all faded to insignificance. Panic surged like a tidal wave through his veins, flooding every rational thought, every careful plan with pure, unadulterated fear. He bolted from the room, knocking papers and pens to the floor, ignoring the astonished stares of executives, leaving behind the empire he had once ruled without thought. His legs moved faster than he had ever imagined possible, carrying him through the city streets, slick with rain, every red light a cruel challenge, every honking horn a jarring reminder of time lost and lives hanging in the balance. Coldstone reached the hospital as if propelled by instinct alone, slipping through corridors, the sterile smell of antiseptic and the faint hum of fluorescent lights assaulting his senses. Nurses and doctors barely noticed him as he barreled past, driven by a force that demanded only one outcome: to reach her, to see her safe, to hold her and ensure that she had survived. Each step felt like an eternity. Each door he passed brought a flicker of hope and the looming threat of despair. And then he saw her. Florina lay on the hospital bed, pale and motionless, the steady beep of the monitors the only indication that life remained. The sight tore through him, a violent combination of relief and terror, as he fell to his knees beside her. He clutched her hand, fingers trembling uncontrollably, brushing over her skin, feeling the fragile warmth that meant she was still alive. Tears fell freely, washing over his face, mixing with the rain from the storm he had weathered both outside and within. "Please," he whispered, voice breaking in a way no boardroom negotiations had ever witnessed. "Take everything I own, everything I am. Just save her. Take me, but keep her alive." The words were both a plea and a vow, raw with emotion, stripped of pride or pretense. His sobs shook his body, resonating through the sterile hospital room, a sound of pure, unfiltered desperation. Hours passed in a blur of waiting, of time stretched impossibly thin, punctuated by the sterile rhythms of the machines and the quiet murmurs of nurses moving about. Coldstone did not leave her side, refusing to eat, refusing to sleep, refusing to breathe fully, consumed entirely by the fragile thread connecting life and death. He held her hand, memorized every line of her face, every imperceptible twitch of her fingers, every breath she drew, each one a victory against the cruel hand fate had dealt. Finally, the doctor approached, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "She's alive," he said cautiously, relief hidden behind professional detachment. "But she's weak, severely injured, and she'll need time." Patience. Coldstone's knees buckled, his body folding against the bed as relief and terror collided within him. He pressed his forehead against her hand, whispering, "Thank God. Thank God you're alive." And then, as if in response to his prayers, her fingers moved, just slightly, almost imperceptibly, yet enough to ignite hope, to fuel the fragile ember of his newfound purpose. "Florina," he breathed, trembling, clutching her hand as if letting go could undo the miracle. "If you wake up, I swear, I'll spend the rest of my life proving you were never a gold digger. You were gold itself." The words were raw, honest, dripping with the humility and adoration he had long denied himself. Minutes stretched into hours as he held her hand, whispering softly, recounting memories, murmuring apologies, recounting regrets, promising redemption in every word, every tremble of his voice, every drop of tears falling upon her skin. Each whisper was a thread weaving them back together, fragile, delicate, yet undeniable. The storm outside began to subside, the rain falling in lighter sheets, the wind sighing against the building, and inside the room, time seemed to pause, a liminal space between despair and hope, between loss and reclamation. Coldstone could not leave, would not leave, not until he had ensured she was safe, not until he could see life return to her eyes, not until he could feel the beating of her heart against his hands once more. And then, a subtle shift. Her eyelids fluttered, her fingers twitched against his palm, her breath caught in a soft gasp. Coldstone's tears fell faster, a torrent of relief, awe and gratitude. "Florina, you're awake, you're alive." His voice cracked under the weight of all the years, all the mistakes, all the pain, all the love he had lost and found again. In that fragile, trembling moment, he realized that fate had not ended with tragedy. It had given him a chance, a dangerous, precious chance to reclaim, to rebuild, to make right what he had once destroyed. And even as exhaustion and fear threatened to overwhelm him, Coldstone held on, determined that this time he would never let go. Months had passed since that stormy night. Months that had rewritten every beat of Coldstone's life, reshaping it from a hollow empire of wealth into a fragile living mosaic of redemption, love, and devotion. Florina had regained strength. Each step she took a testament to her resilience, each smile a quiet rebellion against the years of betrayal and loss. Her elegance had softened into something more profound now, grace tempered by survival, beauty fused with courage, and an aura of quiet authority that demanded respect, not through fear or intimidation, but through sheer presence. Coldstone never left her side during these months. He became a shadow, a protector, a guardian in silence, allowing her to rediscover her strength, while he quietly rebuilt the trust he had shattered. He helped her walk, not with grand gestures or dramatic words, but with gentle, unwavering support. Each morning he carried her carefully from room to room, his fingers brushing hers lightly, memorizing every movement, every detail, as if imprinting her essence into the depths of his soul. He accompanied her to every fitting, every fashion show, every late-night project, and in every moment he worked in silence, never overstepping, never claiming what he had once lost, but always present, a constant heartbeat in the background of her new life. Coldstone took joy in the small acts that had once seemed mundane. He drove Max to school, walked him to the playground, and returned home with tiny socks clutched in his hands, lunches packed perfectly, hair combed with careful attention. These simple actions, unnoticed by the world, were the new pillars of his life, the architecture of a man learning to love without expectation, to serve without resentment, to protect without demanding recognition. And though he remained quiet about his feelings, every glance, every lingering touch, every whispered word in passing carried the weight of a man who had learned the meaning of humility, devotion, and love. The months turned into seasons, each day etching deeper lines of experience and growth upon them both. Coldstone's heart, once hardened by arrogance, became soft in ways he never imagined possible. He laughed genuinely, not with the hollow pride of a billionaire, but with the sincere joy of a man who had been given a second chance. A chance to witness the light in Florina's eyes, to see the sparkle in Max's, to feel the warmth of family he had long abandoned. And yet, despite all the happiness, there remained a quiet tension between them, a question unspoken, a line neither had crossed, because both knew that true healing demanded patience, not proclamations. The pivotal night arrived unexpectedly, woven with the magic of anticipation and the scent of jasmine carried through the summer air. It was Max's birthday, a celebration of 5 years that had been stolen and reclaimed, a night that would mark both innocence and triumph. The backyard of Florina's home had been transformed into a fairy tale scene, strings of lights draped like gentle stars, soft music weaving through the warm air, and the chatter of friends and family creating a cocoon of love and life around them. Max's laughter, light and carefree, echoed as he ran between tables, his eyes glinting with excitement, unaware of the profound drama that was about to unfold in the hearts of the adults watching him. Coldstone had arrived early, arriving with no fanfare, dressed in simple yet elegant attire. His heart pounded in his chest with a rhythm he had learned to recognize as vulnerability rather than fear. A heart open, raw, and unshielded. He watched Florina move through her guests, her posture straight, her smile radiant, her energy commanding attention effortlessly. Every step she took reminded him of what he had lost. Every glance he stole of her face reminded him of the years of regret he had carried. And yet, this night, unlike any other, offered him the slimmest chance to bridge the chasm that had once separated them. Max ran past him, colliding gently with his legs, pulling him into the vortex of youthful energy. Coldstone laughed softly, a sound of pure joy, and lifted his son into his arms. "You're getting taller every day," he whispered, brushing a soft hand through Max's hair. "Soon you'll be taller than me, I think." Max giggled, hugging him tightly, and Coldstone felt a swell of something more than love, something like destiny itself, bending toward reconciliation, urging him forward. The music shifted subtly, and the crowd's attention turned as Coldstone rose, every eye upon him. He had rehearsed these moments in silence, wondered over every gesture, every word, every expression. He moved toward Florina slowly, deliberately, each step weighted with emotion, each breath a prayer. He knelt before her, not in guilt this time, but in devotion, in reverence, in recognition of the woman she had become, and the man he had been forced to rediscover through loss and redemption. "Florina," he began, voice breaking, trembling with every syllable, "you taught me that love is richer than any fortune. I don't want your forgiveness anymore. I don't want a fleeting second chance. I want forever. I want to build a life with you, not as a man who wronged you, but as the one who will never let you fall again." The words spilled into the night air, a mixture of trembling sincerity and raw passion, cutting through the laughter and chatter of the party, silencing every onlooker. Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd, the tension electric, as the woman who had once rejected him now faced the man who had learned the full weight of humility and devotion. Florina's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, not of anger, but of recognition. She saw in him the man she had loved, destroyed, mourned, and now painfully and beautifully reborn. His trembling hands, the softness in his eyes, the vulnerability of his posture, all spoke more truth than words ever could. She reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing his cheek as if to anchor him to the present, to confirm that this moment was real, not a dream conjured from hope. "Don't kneel, Coldstone," she whispered softly, her voice breaking but steady, carrying the authority of love tempered by endurance. Just come home. Come to me. To us. To Maximum. You don't need to kneel to prove your love. Just live it. Her words were a lifeline, a bridge built from patience, a quiet surrender to the years of pain and the possibility of joy. Max ran between them, laughter spilling through the warm night air, wrapping them in innocence and light, a living symbol of the love that had survived betrayal and time. Coldstone rose slowly, still trembling, lifting his hands to hold both Florina and Max, and in that embrace, the past, present, and future intertwined. The stars above seemed to twinkle in approval, the fairy lights casting a soft halo around them, and the air vibrated with the unspoken truth. Love, when tested and tempered by fire, could emerge stronger, purer, unbreakable. As they held each other, the camera, or the imagination of those witnessing the scene, panned to Coldstone's hand. His fingers tightened around the ring she had once worn, now a symbol not of past mistakes, but of promises made, of devotion renewed, of a love that had been refined by years of struggle and patience. This time he would never let go. This time his pride had been replaced by reverence, arrogance replaced by humility, and fear replaced by courage. The night stretched endlessly, full of laughter, music, and whispers of joy. Yet even as the world seemed to settle, a subtle tension lingered in the air, a gentle whisper of future trials, of life's unpredictability, a quiet question suspended above them. Was this forgiveness absolute, or a delicate chance that destiny would test again? The uncertainty hung like a star above their heads, teasing the edges of perfection, promising that the story of their love, though triumphant, was still alive, still breathing, still moving toward whatever fate awaited. And so, under the canopy of stars and fairy lights, surrounded by laughter, love, and the heartbeat of family reclaimed, Coldstone, Florina, and Max embraced, not as fractured souls, not as victims of time or fate, but as three lives intertwined in resilience, devotion, and hope. The night held them tenderly, as if the universe itself paused to witness the culmination of years of longing, regret, and unwavering love, a moment suspended in eternity, beautiful, fragile, and unforgettable. He called her a gold digger, but time proved she was the treasure his soul was searching for. Life has a way of bringing people back, not for revenge, but for redemption. Tell us in the comments, would you forgive someone who once threw you away? Or is some pain too deep to ever trust again? This was Beyond Color Stories, where every tear tells a truth. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because next week's story will test your heart even more.